self-abnegation, willing to die for the other. And of course, I'm half joking here. The Sissy Comp Award goes, and I'll tell you in a minute which department will win this award today. And maybe I should say this week, or is it today? We have perhaps a lot of cases like this, about some of which we hear here on the David Tulis Show. People contact me through Facebook, and the name is Tulis, Tulis. If you want to look me up on Facebook, Tulis, 1L. And I'm the editor of Nuganomics.com. I've been an editor all my life. My job is to make the writers look good at the newspaper. That's what I did for nearly 25 years, make the business editor, Dave Flessner, and before him, John Vass, look good, make the business section just sparkle, and have the best presentation of business and economic news that you could want here in Chattanooga. But Chatsworth gets this Sissy Comp Award on account of its outstanding targeting. I'm not sure that the officer meant to miss, but there was a crucifix on the chest of an old woman, a Syrian Christian named Al-Bishara. She is here, doesn't speak a lick of English, apparently, or if she speaks any, it's broken, and she's not perhaps cognizant of the Southern slang variety of the American speech way. But she was in handcuffs. Okay, she was tased, dropped to the dirt, in which she hurt herself, requiring hospitalization. And the officers are standing firm. They are standing firm as officers do. And Chief Etheridge in Chatsworth says, Josh Etheridge tells TV9 in its report that it used the least force necessary to control the situation. She did everything. She did everything that wrong, and the cops, they did everything right. Now, get this. She's being charged under the Georgia statute for obstruction, willful obstruction, which cannot apply to someone who has not done an act of violence. In Tennessee, it's called resisting arrest, frisk, stop. That statute, resisting arrest statute, is a short word for it. And here in Tennessee, we Tennesseans, there has to be a showing that we used force to resist the stop, frisk, arrest, or search, right? We have to use force. Now, what is force? Now, that could be described various ways. If you do it in terms of physics, force, a sitting object has force, right? The fact that you have to apply a great deal of pressure to push an air conditioner in a box across the floor shows that air conditioner just sitting there in its crate has force, right? It's called inertia. Inertia is a kind of force, but in this sense, force means the striking movement of hand or foot or head or body part or object held by hand against the sanctified area, the holy area of the officer, in his limb, his head, his body, his foot, his hand, all of which are very special places and cannot be touched carelessly, right, or violently. The Georgia statute requires violence on the part of the accused, and I would say cannot be invoked and cannot be used if there is not violence. And that Chief Josh Etheridge would accept this charge against this 87-year-old Christian immigrant who does not speak English, Al-Bishara, that he would accept that charge and not reprimand his officer is simply amazing. I'd say that the courage of this chief is really more than I can really stand. Now, the poor old woman is being charged also with criminal trespassing. And how can that be? And I wonder how possibly you can be charged with criminal trespassing. Criminal trespassing is when you're told not to go on property and you go back. Okay, that's criminal trespassing. There's intent to violate an order given to you to stay off the property. And to charge her with criminal trespassing implies that somehow she had been sternly reminded by the boys' club and girls' club overseers that indeed you, madam, swarthy skinned woman now with a red spot on her chest right near the crucifix. You cannot come on our property, and we will guard our property with our lifeblood. And we will not have you picking dandelions on our property. We will not have you step a foot on our property. And if you do, well, that we are going to prosecute you to the fullest extent of the law. That's criminal trespass. Okay, just simply a neighbor wandering on a lot that has some scrub on it, some trees, and some dirt. That cannot be criminal trespassing. It just simply cannot be. So what we have here, it seems to me, though I've not read the criminal trespassing statute for Georgia, it seems to me we have an overreaction, right? This is called surplus violence. Surplus violence by one more police department, encouraging us to revere, respect, and appreciate and thank the officer that we see at the restaurant for his service. Now, here, okay, so we have the Sissy Award going, let's say this week. I'm not going to do more than one a week, so I won't say it today. I'll say it's this week to the Chatsworth Police Department for the tasing of a woman. Now, here's how it came about, right? We have this this call to 911. There's a person on the Boys and Girls Club property, and that person has a knife. Boys and Girls Club, a knife. So as Chief Etheridge tells the reporter for TV9, well, when we get a call like that, we all rush to the scene, right? Of course, people who call 911 they're sometimes just the absolute worst kind of people you would ever want to meet. And they are troublemakers. They are troublemakers. And people who call 911 intending to have the help of the deputy sometimes regret it. And I'm thinking here of Constance Giles, the family that runs this amazing business in Whitfield County, that being the Rooter Pros plumbing business. David Toulis, what's on your mind?
Hello.
Hey, you reached the David Toulis Show. What do you have to report?
I'm sorry, what?
This is the David Toulis Show on 92.7 Nuka Radio. Did you mean to call me?
Yes, I did.
Go ahead. What's on your mind?
I mean, I kind of agree with him with, you might not need to use that much force on a little old lady like that. But I wish that he would know the trespassing and the obstruction laws of Georgia.
Go ahead. Tell me about them.
The trespassing can also apply to damage to property. And if someone just stays and they refuse to leave, then that could also be a charge. Now, it's not a great charge, but it can be a charge. And then with the obstruction, there's two different types of obstruction in Georgia. There's misdemeanor obstruction and felony obstruction. Felony obstruction is the offering of violence. Misdemeanor obstruction is just like resisting or trying to run away.
Well, I read that statute, and I believe violence is used in both of those, the misdemeanor version and the felony version.
No, the misdemeanor one is without violence, basically. So, and I don't know how she was charged.
Well, the story on TV9 this morning says just criminal trespassing, so it doesn't specify. Probably misdemeanor.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, as far as
go ahead.
Officers might not have had to use much force, but I just wish that the law was explained a little bit better because it is super confusing how they wrote it. Anyways, you know what I mean? So it's not.
Okay, well, listen, I appreciate that. I did look at it just last week when the Constance Giles story broke. I think it was maybe Tuesday, and it does it is, and I think you're wrong about that. I think the misdemeanor obstruction charge does have violence in it too, but you're wrong about that. You are wrong. Misdemeanor is violence, but felony obstruction is when you're using violence against the officer. Okay, so there's
I'm the deputy in Georgia, so I've charged people with those. So
okay, well, I appreciate your call. So you're correcting me then. I'm not going to correct you. Let me just back up. Okay.
No, you're fine. And I mean, I'm not mad about it or anything either. I'm just like, it's so frustrating to deal with the way that the laws are in Georgia also. And the fact that criminal trespass can apply for damage under 500 also, and it's super vaguely worded also. Like, it's frustrating as a deputy.
Well, does it not require, well, let me ask you, I appreciate your calling, but hang on, don't go away. In Georgia, trespassing, don't you have to have some clear order of not? Does this woman not have to be told, ma'am, you can't come on this property to hunt dandelions? You just doesn't there have to be some kind of just being on someone's property, especially when it's a corporation in its sort of a wild area, that can't be trespassing, can it? I mean, does there not have to be some prior connection with her telling her, please don't come on the property?
So, I mean, it depends on how the DAs and the counties want to prosecute it, because it is kind of worded vaguely. I've worked for 2 different counties. One county, like, you had to, like, they had to leave and then get trespassed, and then if they came back. The other county, it was if you told them they were trespassed and then they refused to leave, you could arrest them right then.
Right. So there has to be some resistance to departing from the property for it to be a crime. And
yeah.
there's no clear indication that the boys club said that to this woman.
Now, on an officer or deputy standpoint, you have to have a lot more tact than those guys had with it.
Well, let me ask you a question. Go ahead.
I'm not agreeing with what the Chatsworth guys did.
I understand. Well, let me ask you a question. It seems, and I really appreciate hearing from you, and so does my listener. We want to, we want to encourage right law enforcement, and we have nothing against officers per se, but we're seeing a lot of bad stories. Here's a question I want to ask you, and it's something like this: How important is it to offload the risk of your profession upon the citizen or the member of the public? It seems to me that officers are unwilling to take the slightest risk. I mean, how risky is it to approach an old woman and say, ma'am, could you just hand me the knife, and not have to stand 12 feet away to shoot her with this cattle prod gun? Isn't there some way that there could have been some assumption of risk on the part of these strong men with their armor plate and so on, and said, ma'am, we really, and just take her home a little bit. Maybe just take her across the street and say, ma'am, please just go home now. I mean, why not? There just seems to be an unwillingness to take any risk at all by these officers who end up in the headlines.
Yeah. I mean, I think some people get a little too anxious, and I think some officers and deputies, to be honest, they don't like someone saying no to them. They're just like, well, I'm the one in charge, so you have to do it. Like, you have to sit there and talk to people sometimes. You know what I mean? Well, like you shouldn't just automatically go to, well, I asked them to leave and they're not leaving, so now I just got.
Well, okay, you're answering a different question. I want to get to that question, but the question I'm asking you, man in uniform, is the risk question, because here these officers acted in her presence as if somehow she was a real threat to their health and safety and welfare. Oh. And they seem absolutely unwilling to say, just come up behind her and say, ma'am, could we just escort you back across the street to your home, because maybe you need a little help. Clearly she was not. The fact that she was holding up a knife does not mean that she's trying to hurt them. I mean, she's probably scared of these police people.
I mean, and I hate to put it this way, anyone's capable of violence at any time. And unless you know that they don't have a weapon on them, and even if they don't have a weapon, people can hurt you, no matter what.
But isn't that a bit a lot? Why would you want to enter into a profession like that where you're supposed to be fearful all the time? How is it that you, the officer, are supposed to be afraid continually of people, including old women? And the reason you entered into that profession was to spare. You're there to be you're there to save women and children. You're there to take the bullet for the old woman, right? You, the officer, are supposed to be willing to take a bullet for an old woman to die in her place, right? Isn't there something self-sacrificial about your calling as an officer?
I mean, if that's what's required, but all of us try not to do that. You know what I mean?
No, not really. Go ahead and explain it.
Is to, serve and protect, but it's also to go home.
Well, which is more important, serving and protecting or going home for many of these officers?
Well, and that's the thing, is you've got to have a little bit more tact to be able to serve and protect and go home at the same time. Well,
in this particular case, let me just ask you, did any of these officers really think that in this encounter, this might be my last day as an officer, and I may be lying down tonight, not in my bed with my wife, but in a casket? Did anybody actually think that in this encounter, would you think?
Yeah, every single time I put on my vest and put on my uniform, I think I might die that day.
Yeah, but in this particular encounter, would that have evoked that kind of fear?
I mean, I can't really speak for them with it.
Would it have done so in you?
I haven't seen video or anything of it either, but I mean, I can tell you, I would think that I would have handled it a little bit differently.
Well, I know you would have, because you're smart enough to give David Toulis at least a minute of your time to tune in. But so you're the kind of person I think we want to have more of in these ranks. You my caller, because you realize that this is an encounter that's not going to be your last. Even if she lunged at you, which there's no sign that she was going to do that. She had some flowers in her other hand. There's not reason for fear. That's why it seems that tasing her, that using a cattle prod against her is really just extraordinary.
Well, and I mean, did she have a weapon with her?
Yes, she had a knife, which is definitely a weapon.
Okay.
But it's also a cooking implement.
Here's look up. There was a shooting in San Jose, California, San Jose Police Department, where a Vietnamese lady, I think she was in like her 60s or 70s, had a vegetable peeler. And they ended up shooting her. Look into that case. There was a lot of interesting things that came out of that case. There was a lawsuit and all sorts of stuff about it too.
Well, how can you distill what you've read about it? Give us the best of your reading of that case, because we don't want you to go away without saying something about it.
With which one?
The San Jose case you're mentioning.
Oh, the San Jose case. Basically, like, the family called because she was having a mental episode, and then the officers were trying to get her out of the house. Trying to get the rest of the family out of the house, and there was a language barrier because most of them only spoke Vietnamese. And there's a lot of Vietnamese speaking officers with San Jose, but there wasn't any that responded to that. And they were inside of a house, and the lady had a vegetable peeler, a Vietnamese vegetable peeler, but if you look at it, it's more shaped like a meat cleaver, like it's a rather large knife. And she kind of lunged at them, because she was frustrated and angry and having a mental episode, but they ended up shooting her and killing her. And the shooting was justified, but the family still tried to sue, saying that they, that the officer should have not shot her.
Let me ask you a question about your
outcome of that lawsuit, but I know that the officers were justified in shooting.
All right. Well, and okay. What I'm thinking of a reform in which every officer in Tennessee, at least, would be required at his own expense to have a $5 million bond. I'm not sure what that would cost. It might be $250 a year, but that way he is covered, and the taxpayer doesn't have to pay for the insurance coverage for the county or the city that hired him. Would that be a disincentive for you to become an officer if you knew you had to buy your own bond?
Well, I think,
say for $5 million.
I don't think I don't think that that's reasonable, because then the thing, if you start putting that much, like, on an officer, there's already a problem with people wanting to go into law enforcement. As it is, there's not enough people. There's not enough well-qualified people, because there's so many people that don't want to do the job already. I mean, I do have some coverage on my own. Like, there's some associations that law enforcement can belong to and stuff, and I belong to some of them that give me some of that protection and everything. But it's not, because if you have to go in there and you second guess every single thing that you do all the time, constantly, and you're constantly worried about getting sued, then you're just going to quit and you won't do the job, and then you won't have any.
Well, having a bond would not encourage a lawsuit. Just having a bond would cover you and would make you, your actions in killing people or injuring them are on you and your guarantor, not on the county or the city. That's why you would have a bond. But it seems like something that would make officers aware that they have they have an obligation to people that they meet, and hopefully not to injure them, right?
Yeah. Well, and I mean, like, if you look at that shooting with what happened in San Jose, I believe that he was justified to shoot her. He didn't know what her intentions were, and she was coming at him with a rather large knife. And the family was right there too, so he shot her to protect himself and to protect the family that was, like, in the same room with him.
Well, listen, I really appreciate your calling.
The family still turned around and shoot him, so.
Well, listen, officer, thank you so much for calling. We appreciate hearing from you, and be safe out there today, okay? Please be careful.
All right.
Yes, sir. Thanks for the call. This is David Toulis, and I do thank you for tuning in and calling. The number is 800-8949. Call me tomorrow. We've got a lot going on, and appreciate your time. David Toulis, Nuga Radio. Next is Sean Hannity.
3, 2, 1.
Chattanooga Radio. Digital FM 95.3 HD4. 92.7 FM's news now.
Hamilton County Health Department says at least 2 Chattanoogans were infected with E. coli after eating at the River Drifters restaurant on Suck Creek Road. Police believe the E. coli came from the well water. The health department says the restaurant is complying and they're working